Hello, and thanks for joining us for Prepped and Polished Education and Inspiration. I am your host, Alexis Avila. I'm an educator, I'm an online entrepreneur, and founder of tutoring and test prep firm Prepped and Polished, and we're broadcasting today from South Natick, Massachusetts. And the Prepped and Polished Education and Inspiration podcast is your destination for groundbreaking insight from today's most influential educators, leaders, and minds on the planet. And today our show is brought to you by Plan for College Videos. Nationally known college planning expert Paul Hemphill has a wonderful series of college planning videos, about 100 of them. And his videos ask all the questions with answers that parents don't know to ask. Parents don't know what they don't know, so the frustration ends with Paul's videos. To learn more about those, you can go to www.planning-for-college.com/videos. And thank you to everyone for tuning in today. Today, joining our show today is Debbie Stier, who is the author of The Perfect Score Project, a book which highlights a mom's adventure preparing for and taking the SAT a whopping 7 times in 1 year. Debbie's story and book about her story were featured on the Today Show and in publications such as the New Yorker, Huffington Post. Debbie shares with us the secrets she learned preparing for the SAT, from working with private SAT tutors to showing up to the test site as the only mom in the testing room. And to our listeners, you can submit a question at any time to radio@Prepped and Polished. We always appreciate hearing from you. Debbie Stier, thank you so much for joining us today on Education and Inspiration. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So I found you, Debbie, a couple years back on YouTube, and I found your videos to be infectious. And they were informative, fun, and you keep the energy high, the pacing moving. And when I saw them, I thought, either this lady has video editing experience or is just a natural in front of the camera. So a little bit of both?
I actually rarely edited them, only if I went on too long. I found the editing to be arduous. So the goal was one take, that's it. And if it was going to be more work than that, I didn't put it up. Occasionally I did end up editing it, but just to get it down to a manageable time length, because I speak too long. So anyway, I got lucky for a year. I stopped doing it, and now I'm like, what was I thinking? It's too hard to do videos.
Yeah, definitely. So let's just go back a little bit. We got a bunch of listeners who are teens, and they're listening to you. And I'd just like to find out where you grew up as a child and what you were like as a teen.
Okay. I grew up in Princeton, New Jersey, a college town. And I'll be honest, I was a little bit of a wild teen, not unlike my own son, who was the one who inspired this project. I thought it was more fun and interesting to be hanging out with my friends than I did to be studying. And so I did abysmally in high school on the SAT. And I was an artsy kid. I was always creative, and I worked for various artists and photographers. And so I ended up going to a creative school that didn't require the SAT, which was Bennington. I applied to 4 schools that didn't require SATs at the time.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And who were some of your major your influences while growing up?
Well, that's interesting that you asked that. I lived right down the street from John McPhee, and I was friends with his daughters, and he used to read his writing to us as he was going along, and I remember a lot of things about that experience, but one of the things I remember is that he said, don't ever be a writer unless you have to be. It is really hard. Unless you feel totally compelled to do that, don't do it. And that just stuck with me, and I would say that was a big influence. And actually his former wife, who was a photographer, was also a big influence on me and always encouraged me to write and to, accept my creative spirit. So anyway, at the time, those were the influences on me.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And could you share a little bit about yourself by focusing on a couple of pivotal moments that brought you to this moment where you end up taking the SAT 7 times as a mom?
Yeah, okay, so I'll sort of paint the scenario, which was, I was a single working mom. I had a 20-plus year career in book publishing. I worked round the clock in corporate America, and my kids, it was, I guess, 2007, 2008, were latchkey teenagers. And, I would come home at 7 o'clock exhausted, and I go, did you do your homework? And they go, yeah, Mom. And I go, okay. And, maybe they did it and maybe they didn't do it. My daughter was probably more diligent than my son was at the time. And, he was a normal kid who was going to try and slide by, doing the least amount possible. I guess he sort of had trouble seeing into the future, as most kids do. I did. And, I would see it as my job as his parent to help him see, what the opportunities and liabilities might be. Anyway, so he was in high school, and he was doing okay. And I'm going to say this. He worked harder in high school than he had in middle school, but he had some unfortunate things happen. So freshman year, he had a series of concussions. Well, that killed that year as far as grades were concerned. And by the way, took him out of sports. Sophomore year, he had the worst case of mono that started on Thanksgiving, and he slept the entire year. Terrible for the GPA. So here we were. It was 2008. I wasn't quite realizing we were in a recession, and but I could feel that things weren't great. And I had a kid with a B average, and it seemed like everybody else had 4 point something. I didn't even know there was higher than 4.0, but there is. And everybody had the extracurriculars, and they're captain of this, and volunteering here, and we didn't have that. And I definitely started to feel panicky, like, well, how am I going to get this kid into college? And so I remembered somewhere reading that SAT scores, were maybe more valued than, in the town we were in at the time, there was a lot of talk about, SAT optional schools and don't put so much pressure on your kids. And the town seemed to buy that in general. But I remembered reading somewhere in some news story that maybe the SATs count for more than people were admitting they do in schools. And so I did a little bit of research, and I decided that we would, really go for it with the SAT and see, if he could reach his potential. I knew he was a smart kid. And so that was sort of how it was born. It was the end of 10th grade, going into the summer going into 11th grade, and I started investigating the SAT with the question of the day from the College Board and became obsessed, and it grew from there.
You say obsessed, and I was thinking the whole time, you must have in your personality, like you just when you set your eyes on something, you're a master motivator. To take the SAT 7 times, did that become infectious?
It did hook him. We had a terrible moment. So the project eventually grew into a book idea. I was blogging about it, and a publisher called me, and I was going to take the test one time. And then a publisher called and said, oh, that's a book. And I thought, as an editor, a book needs a structure. Let me come up with a structure. And I seemed to be the only one who loved the SAT. And I thought, well, let me, investigate, and I'll write sort of a consumer report on everything you would ever need to know and spare other parents the anxiety and the frustration of not knowing what works and what doesn't and the best path. And so, yes, I am, I can be very, very focused and obsessed and enthusiastic, but my son did not catch on at the beginning, and that actually, our scores increased dramatically. We beat the odds many times over. But the real magic was not our score game. The real magic was really what I learned about motivating a teenager, because in the middle of the project, he rebelled like he'd never rebelled before, and he dug his heels in and said, I will not do it. And he really would not do it. And, the whole project almost fell apart. And I thought, oh, no, what am I going to do? And it's now time for him to study. And so I had to figure out how to motivate him and how to get him back, how to reclaim my relationship with him. And that really was the sweetest part of the whole project and the big gift of having done this together. And both of us changed as, he changed as a student and as a person, and I certainly changed as a mom. But it was much more profound than our score increases, which, as I said, were dramatic.
Definitely. And it's been nice that you've kind of shared the, book promo tour, kind of, so to speak. He's been on TV with you.
Yeah, he has been on TV with me, and my daughter has done a few interviews as well.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us a little bit about the private tutors you hired.
Yep.
I know you had some things that worked, some things that didn't, some revelations as a result. And also, I'm wondering if you ended up a little broke shelling out money for all these tutors.
Yeah, well, I did a lot money from my book advance. But otherwise, I would not have had the money to spend on the tutors. And some of the tutors, the most expensive tutor in the end wouldn't accept money from me. But I came to him, I think it was 3 weeks before my final test, and he said, there's just no way that you can improve. And I'm going to say that's one of the morals of the story, is that, it really is not a fast process for most people, and most people underestimate, myself included, how much time everything takes, and we don't know what we don't know. And I think you said that at the beginning, and I was thinking, so that is one of the things that I learned, was that, a lot more time than you think it's going to take. And I hear a lot, being good at the SAT is just knowing how to take the test well. And I'm going to disagree with that and say that, to do well at the SAT is to, do well in high school and to learn for college. So it's not like it's this waste of time. I mean, it's vocabulary, it's math, it's writing, it's reading. They're core skills that you need and you will need, including, on the job later on. So that is one of the things that I learned, that no matter how fabulous the tutor was, and I had some great tutors, there are little things that you can do to sort of, maximize your experience. But the College Board says the average score gain after test prep is 5 to 20 points, and that's probably about right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my score increased 330, my son's 590 points, but the thing is, we worked for it was a year-long project.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to say the average student, if you want to have significant gains, not all, but the average student, and myself included, it's, learning happens over a long time. They're testing, how deep your knowledge is, as you know.
Yeah, you mentioned, I saw a couple videos the other day, and you mentioned that there's a foundation that you just can't crash course to learn.
Exactly. And that's, in the end, I raised my scores in reading and writing significantly. And for all intents and purposes, my math score stayed the same. I went from 510 to 570. So I raised it a little bit, but not so much. And what I would say is, I had a strong foundation in reading and writing. I worked in book publishing for 23 years. So with great test prep, you can improve a strong foundation. You can do well. But without a strong foundation, the greatest test prep in the world is only going to get you a little bit. It's like, I try and describe it by saying it's like trying to unbake a cake. There's so many ingredients baked into each one of those problems that, it's hard to do it backwards. It would have been a better idea for me to go back and take Algebra 1 and Geometry and Algebra 2 and then do test prep on top of that.
Definitely. And it sounds like, there's math strategies that you can employ, like those back solving and plugins, but it can only take you so far.
Exactly. And, I always said the learning is easy and remembering is hard. The SAT, you have to go fast. So there's no time to stop and scratch your head and go, wait a second, is 0 an integer? Is it positive or negative? Like, that stuff has to be automatic so that you can move and groove quickly, because that stuff is all just baked into those problems. And if that's not down cold, the back solving is not going to help you. If that stuff's down cold, then sure, back solving and plug-in, and there's all sorts of techniques that you can use to speed up the process and do the problems quickly. But if you're like I was and fumbling around going, wait, what do you do when you have to, subtract exponents, or I'm making this up, or how do you FOIL a polynomial? And, you're in trouble.
Absolutely. You mentioned on your blog a couple of blog posts ago that you equated SAT prep with marathon training, which you actually ran one yourself, a marathon.
Yes.
And I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I ran some 3 marathons in Boston last couple of years.
Wow, good for you.
And I completely agree. And it's kind of like what we're talking about. It's just a long-term process. But how do you equate SAT prep with marathon training?
Well, it's interesting. It is a long-term process, and then you have to break it down. It's really hard, like many or even all long-term projects. So you have to keep the big focus and the little focus in mind at once. So for my son, we had a year-long calendar, and the first thing we did was we mapped out all of the vacations, and then we put down all the big events that were going to happen and when the AP exams were. And so we put all that stuff in place a year in advance. Then when we saw sort of where the most logical place for him to take the test was, we marked that down. Then we worked backwards. Okay, we wanted him to take at least 10. He actually ended up taking 14 full-time practice tests before the real SAT. So you need, a full Saturday for that, or you need a good chunk of time. And then time to go over all of your answers so that you learn from your mistakes and hopefully don't make those same mistakes the next time. So, we did this whole big planning calendar, and then you get in the weeds and you just kind of go, you plot along. And I plotted it actually on a graph, and, he was up higher than I was. So the graph wasn't going up as, markedly as it did for me. Towards the end, but nonetheless, when you start to get a lot of data, you can see the line moving in the right direction, and that was very motivating. But yeah, you just have to commit and keep going and don't give up and try and have fun with it. And I think that was the first time my son had ever done a long-term project, and I certainly don't think I had done that when I was his age. And it changed him as a person and a student. He chose his own goal, which, by the way, I think is critical. If he didn't buy into the goal, I couldn't. It wasn't an external thing. So he chose his own goal, and I don't think he thought he would hit his goal. It was high, but it wasn't perfect, which was right. And then he went, and then he hit his goal, and it was a year-long project. I don't think he thought he was going to do it, and when he did, I think it made him feel so good. He said, I hope he doesn't mind me telling the story, but, he wasn't necessarily known as like the smart kid in school. Like he was a fun kid. He was an athlete. When people heard what his score was, they were like, you got that score? Like he got an 11 on the essay, and his English teacher, no one gets an 11 on the essay, or few people anyway. She was having him come in to tell the kids how he got the 11 on the essay.
That's awesome.
So it really boosted his confidence, and he took that confidence and applied it to school and got his best GPA ever end of junior year, and senior year even higher than that. And into college, he left with his own expectations for himself that were much higher than they were before we started the project. He was a workout fiend, and he's got all sorts of workout goals. I'm sure that this project contributed to that sort of goal-setting mentality.
That's amazing. Wow. Yeah. Just to piggyback the whole marathon prep and SAT kind of relation, I think that you could probably make the case that even on test day, when you're on doing the test, it's almost like you're running a marathon, because you don't want to run, out of the gates mile 1. You don't want to sprint, or you're not going to finish.
Exactly. Yes, it's so true. You have to pace yourself. And, I had this one test that, the proctor messed me up at the beginning, and I could not get my footing back. And, if I had that to do over again now, I would, sort of have a plan for, okay, how do I recenter myself? If, pretend you're at the marathon, you trip, you fall, you need a way to get back up and keep going. And I didn't have that on that day. It didn't occur to me. It was my 6th out of 7 SATs, and I'd had 5 good ones before that. So it didn't occur to me that, something could go awry. Many things could go awry.
Absolutely. So you take the SAT 7 times in 5 different test sites. And
Yes.
I'm wondering, what was it like to show up as a mom taking a test among a bunch of nervous teens on Saturday morning?
Well, first of all, none of them ever seemed nervous, which always surprised me. They were so calm and cool, and there was definitely a different vibe and a different flavor at each school. No one seemed to notice me. No one talked to me. It was, sometimes I knew the kid. One time the kid had grown up like 2 doors down, and he was a couple people in front of me, and it was like he didn't even know me. And that night I had dinner at his house, and of course we were talking, and I never bothered to ask, well, why didn't you say hello to me? I guess it's just like a thing in that town. You don't speak to the grown-ups. But I was always surprised that they didn't. I mean, maybe when I walked out of the room, they were all like, "Who's the old lady?" But when I was there, they just acted as if I was a student. They were very nonchalant, I'm going to say. So
Gotcha,
I was surprised at that. Nobody seemed nervous. I seemed nervous. I felt nervous.
You were
anyway.
nervous, right?
Right.
So, Debbie, your blog is really entertaining and informative. Can you tell us a little bit about your blog and the kind of responses you've gotten from people about your helpful, informative blog posts?
Thank you. I'm rejiggering my blog to try and make it more helpful. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have sort of 4 different pathways you can go, which is, there'll be one for parents, one for students, one for, is the SAT a week away, or did your scores just come back, and another one for guidance counselors, because those are basically the 4 different types of people that come there. And so I have all this content on my site, but I want to make it more logical and manageable. So here's a step-by-step process.
Nice.
So hopefully that'll be up in a few weeks. But the response I get from parents is, 8 out of 10 times, oh my God, that's my son, when they start to read about my son. And you read about these kids in the news, and this is part of where my hysteria was coming from. These kids who are driven and obsessed, and the parents need to back off. And I was like, well, what am I doing wrong? Because that is not my kid. Not then, anyway, not back in 9th and 10th grade. And I think there's this perception that, there are these like hardworking striver kids out there, and I'm sure there are, but they were not the kids I was seeing. And, they're not the majority of the kids. And so most of the parents read the beginning of my book or read a little bit about my blog, and they go, that's my son, he's disorganized and thinks he's getting an A and ends up with a C because he forgot to turn his homework. And so most of the emails from parents I get are that, and then I also get a lot of, where do I start? And, people are confused. There's, I think, 4.5 million different options for SAT test prep. And so, I try and steer them in, here's how to tell if it's good and bad direction. And then from the students, I get a lot of, how can I improve my critical reading without doing the vocabulary? I think that's the most popular question. Or, will you grade my essay, or do you have any essay tips? So that seems to be what people come to me for most. But people have been incredibly supportive, and I love getting the emails, and it's been a lot of fun.
That's awesome. And who does the amazing artwork on your blog? We got to plug this artist.
Oh, thank you. Her name is Jennifer Lewis, and her website is called August Wren, W-R-E-N. And she is the mother of that boy that didn't say hello to me. She was my former neighbor, and I love her style, and she's a wonderful artist. AugustWren.com.
Yeah, that brings a really nice charm to your blog. Love it.
Thank you.
So where's Ethan today?
Ethan is at college today. He's at Loyola University, Maryland, and he's in his 3rd day of his sophomore year, or 2nd day. And he's an economics major with a math minor. And he got to school, and this is interesting, actually. He joined the Outdoor Wilderness Club. He always liked camping, and but I'm not going to say it was, he wasn't like obsessed with it. He wasn't like an Eagle Scout or anything
with friends
like that.
once in a while. Or...
Yeah, he and my dad would go camping and fishing, and they liked that. But when he got to school, he applied for an outdoor wilderness leadership position, and I'm not sure what drew him to that. He'd done the pre-orientation fall program, and they went, I think, rock climbing, and he liked it a lot. So anyway, it turned out he got the job, and that last year he had 450 hours of training, and it was the most rewarding job, and it was so perfect. And now this year he's a leader, and he led a couple of freshman groups on their orientation trips. I think there was a caving trip and a kayaking trip. And I'm going to say it does sort of fit in with this SAT thing, because it was another long-term project. He had to, clock those 450 hours and take classes and do this, and you get in the weeds and you have to sort of just see the next thing in front of you, but then you stand back and you look at the big picture, and wow, like now I'm certified in this and that, and I don't know what they are, but like a woofer training and all sorts of stuff that in life is going to benefit you, but there's a lot of nitty-gritty down in the weeds stuff that you have to do before you can take your bird's eye view and go, wow, I learned a lot, and that was a really good thing. So it was a great place for him.
So he's on track.
He is so on track. He loves what he's studying, and he is at the right place. And yeah, it all turned out happily ever after so far, anyway.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So the bridge from the teenage years to young adulthood is exciting. It's a confusing time, especially right before college. So for teens listening out there, kind of looking up to you, what piece of advice would you have for him or her?
I'll sound like the mom, but I'll tell you a funny story. So when we went down for the orientation before his freshman year, and they separated the students and the parents, and they gave us each the same quiz. And one of the questions on the quiz was, for the parents, they asked, how badly does your kid want to go to college? And it was, say 1 to 10. And every parent wrote, 9 or 10. And they asked the kids, how badly do you want to leave home and go to college? And all the kids wrote like 1 and 2. And so they said, then they pulled us back together and they showed us, the way the parents answered it and the way the students answered it. And, basically what they were saying was, your kid is telling you they want to go away. And in fact, they start to act really awful so that I think you want them to go away. But the truth of the matter is, they're scared. It's the scariest time. I remember there being 2 scariest times of my life, and going off to college was one, and graduating from college and having to go into the real world was the other.
Right.
And when I was driving home from that orientation with my son, he said, I told him, I said, isn't that funny? And he keeps saying that you want to go away, and I was believing you, but really, he said, no, I was one of the kids who answered it. So he would never even admit, and maybe he did really want to go away, but he came home after a few weeks. He was really homesick. It's a really, I think, everyone says moving is the scariest, or most stressful time in your life. And it is stressful. I think going to college is really scary and stressful. And I don't know if anybody is exempt from that. Even the most confident people, it's a really scary time. And I think, that's normal, and just know everybody else feels that way too. And I'm going to assume most parents love their kids, even if sometimes in these stressful times it can get tense and doesn't feel that way. But but parents love is unconditional, and no matter what happens, we're always there for them. And so don't be afraid to ask for help.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. How can we find you? Listen to you speak?
PerfectSchoolProject.com, and I have some events in the fall, interviews coming up, and I'm actually working on my next project now. And I'm going to revamp my site. You can find me on my site and email me and stay in touch.
Well, thank you so much, Debbie. Appreciate you coming on, sharing your adventures, taking the SAT 7 times. Lessons you learned along the way. Your story helps us all.
Thank you, Alexis. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. And to learn more about Debbie's amazing insights, writing, perfectscoreproject.com. I read it often. Helpful links, resources at the top of the blog. And while you're there, pick up her book. It's The Perfect Score Project. Thank you for joining us on Prepped and Polished Education and Inspiration.